evening, rebels and rule breakers of the world. Tonight, I am bringing you an interview that I'm really, really looking forward to, and that is with Sean Keily. And we've entitled it Life After Addiction, which sounds pretty intense and in depth, and I no doubt it will be, but we'll also throw a bit of light in there as well with the real life hard hitting stuff. And I've got a bit of a surprise for you all today, and that is that I am not interviewing Sean alone. I am interviewing him with our amazing master rebel, or one of our amazing master rebels, Nadia Martelli.
Hi everyone.
There's Nads. So, good evening, my dear. It looks like we've got a pretty quiet night so far on the old numbers, which is quite unusual, but we'll go with it because it will. I'm sure it'll reach the people that it needs to reach, and we may pick up as we go along, and it'll be saved in the ether of the internet, crystallized forevermore. So I suppose it would be absolutely the right time now to introduce our guest. So welcome to our live stream, and I'm really, really proud and honoured to have him here, Mr. Sean Keily.
Hi Emma, hi Nad. How you doing? Hi.
Yeah, good.
Good evening. And look at that for a background, musicalness and things. Have you just set that up special for us? Is that normal?
No, that's how it always is. There's a couple more tucked away out of shot as well, out of shot.
Wow.
You can never have too many guitars. As a guitar player, Nadia knows this as a musician. You can never have too many
addictive,
guitars.
Doesn't it? Yeah, I definitely know people, musicians who have that situation where they just collect guitars all over the place. So Sean, Nad's introduced you to me, to this group. In fact, you've been a member of Rebels and Rule Breakers for a while. How long would you say?
Oh, probably a year, 18 months, something like that.
So one of the probably longest standing members of the group, and you've done a good job of kind of lurking around and contributing here and there, and being generally,
I hang around in the background, and I always check out what's going on, and I put the occasional like, but I just I keep under the radar.
Yeah, and which is great, because we like the vocal stuff, and we like the people that lurk as well, because we've always said that as long as people are getting something from the space we're creating, that's great. Absolutely. And it doesn't matter how much they interact or not. But this is well and truly you not being under the radar now.
Yeah, totally out there.
So Nads, tell us a little bit about why you felt it would be great for us to interview Sean.
I think I've been friends with Sean for like 30 years, and I've known the journey that he's been on, and he's just been so supportive of me and my journey, and the parallels that we've run across and the differences that we've run across. I just thought he had a lot to give to the group and a lot to teach other people from his experience. And so I thought, let's go for it. Let's put him forward.
Absolutely brilliant. And, any recommendation that you have, Nancy, is one that I'm always going to trust. And I definitely, when I got sort of on a Zoom with Sean, within seconds, I was like, yep, this is going to be a good one. So we've entitled this interview Life After Addiction.
Yeah.
And one of the things you said to me, as he's tickering along the bottom here, is, you in just genuine kind of casual conversation almost, you said to me that you've climbed your Everest, and that the key message that really stood out for me was that the addiction doesn't have to be your whole story, that there is life after that. And I know there are people that this will resonate with and will touch quite deeply, either because they've experienced it firsthand or via loved ones. And I thought it was a really, really important thing to bring into the group, because it's not something that we've ever covered before. So give us a little synopsis, a bit of background, a kind of intro to you and what's important to you right now, and perhaps a bit of your story.
Well, probably best if I take you back to when I first left school. You first go out on the town drinking with your mates. And that's probably the first point at which I started to see that my behaviours were a little bit different and more extreme than my friends around me. So when they were drinking pints, I was drinking pints and chasers. When they were waiting for the last taxi home, I was still in the club drinking. And when I got home, there was more there waiting for me. And I basically carried on until I passed out. And that was in the early days. And I guess the wheels first started to fall off my wagon a few years in. By the time I was 21, I was starting to just struggle emotionally, coping with day-to-day life, just the pressures that we all have to face. But I was struggling to deal with it, and it culminated. I could feel a breakdown coming, and as is my way, I sort of ran from that. So that manifested in me giving up my job, my flat, my car, my Triumph 650 motorbike, which I loved, my fiance, don't leave her out. I basically packed everything in, literally headed for the hills. And I disappeared off to Wales in the Preseli Hills, rented a caravan on the top of a mountain, and stayed there for a few months until I got my head right.
Wow.
Strange journey in itself. I say got my head right. My daily diet consisted of a lot of special brew and LSD. So I still spent a few minutes just wandering the hills in this crazy state of mind. But as weird as that sounds, it served its purpose at the time. And I came back some months later, sort of rejuvenated and refreshed. Tried to slot back into normality again. I hooked up with a partner, got myself back into work. I was working in the care profession at this time, working with adults with mental and physical handicaps. And as much as I loved my job and I tried to keep on the straight and narrow, the drinking continued. The drug taking started to escalate. It moved on from being social drug taking to a little bit more of a dependency. And by my mid-20s, inevitably, everything went wrong again. I couldn't maintain the pressure. The relationship broke down. I had a young baby at this point and a mortgage. So all that went by the wayside. And I started on a long journey that spiraled into addiction, alcoholism, homelessness. And I don't want to paint too dark a picture because ultimately my story is a tale of redemption and recovery and hope. And I'm quite well out of the other side of it now and reflecting back as I'm talking to you. But it's as if I'm telling a story about another person. I've had to sort of find a rebirth within myself. And I think any addict has to do that in order to come out of the other side. So obviously there's a lot of detail and nuance in the whole story, but that's it in a nutshell.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, one of the biggest questions people ask, I find myself being asked, is what took you into your addiction?
Yeah.
It's a big question. There's no one answer. It's probably different for every addict. And I've already alluded to the fact that my behaviours were a little bit different to other people's, even in the early days, and then that just escalated through my 20s. Once the relationship had broken down with my partner, I'd ostensibly lost contact with my daughter. The shame steps in, the regret steps in, the need to resolve that, self-medicated in some way becomes ever more apparent, and the drinking increased, the drug taking increased. The amphetamine crept in, the needles crept in, and then the big game changer, heroin. That really changed everything. And you start off again with all of my drug taking. Initially, it served its purpose. It's the ultimate comforter, also the ultimate deceiver, and it takes you down very quickly. And initially, heroin is something that you do, and it very quickly becomes something that you are.
Right.
And at that point, it's very hard. It's a runaway train. It's very hard to get off. once you're
It
at that.
sounds like almost a possession, like it possesses you.
Oh, absolutely. It totally consumes you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people talk about drug takers making choices. And yes, initially you make those choices, and they're bad choices. We all make the bad choices. But as I say, once you get to that point, your ability to make choices is taken away from you. It goes. So not only are you caught into your addiction, the tools that you need to get back out of it, you've no longer got. So as I say, you're on this runaway train. It's like a game of Jumanji. You can't just step out of the game.
Okay.
You've got to keep throwing the dice and see it through to the end.
Yeah.
And that end can take various forms. We all appreciate. For some people, it's prison. For some people, it's an early death. For the lucky few, it's rehab, recovery, and you come out of the other side. Unfortunately, it is a few, and not many make it. And I consider myself lucky and blessed in that respect. So I'm here today.
And you said very eloquently before, and you are a very, very articulate person, that yours is a tale of redemption and recovery and hope, and that you found a rebirth. And I suppose it seems like perhaps another obvious question, but what were the poignant moments for you? Moments. I suspect there was a collection of moments that turned the direction of what was happening for you.
There were a collection of moments. You're quite right. And again, there's as many reasons that took me into the addiction. There's just as many that got me out of the other side. There were certain fundamental key points along the way. I'm going to put it. For a long time, I was in what psychiatrists will call pre-contemplation stage, where you're almost content in your addiction.
Right.
You're not considering coming out to the other side.
You sort of resigned yourself to the fact that
you resign to it, yeah.
Right.
And I got to the stage with that where I became so ill towards the end that I resigned myself to an early death.
Yeah.
Doctors said you won't see 50 now. I had no reason not to believe them. Certainly in the last 2 or 3 years, I was just heading towards death rapidly.
Right. And that must have a cumulative, quite accelerated effect at one point.
The strange thing is, as much as you sort of accept the early death, you accept that is your fate. You can't see a way out of it. That's why you have to accept it. It's a choice by default. I mean, by this stage, most addicts have tried and failed repeatedly.
Yeah.
As had I. The longest I'd ever gone, apart from jail, was 7 weeks.
Is there a statistically average amount of times that an addict will go through the attempt at?
It's different for everybody.
The cycle of addiction, isn't it?
Yeah. There's so many issues that you have to address in order for your recovery to be successful. That in itself is a process that you have to learn. The process that gets you out is a learned process. And you can begin to learn that while you're in your addiction. As much as I'm quite cynical in as much as very, very few make it, very few get out the other side. And you certainly can't speed the process up. It's for each individual to find the point at which he's ready to recover. That said, there are things that we can do as a society, as a community. I work in the field now with substance misuse. So on a daily basis, I'm helping people to make positive choices and positive steps towards their own recovery. The key to that is working with people where they are at this moment, rather than dangling the carrot and the stick approach. It doesn't work with addicts. It's
a big leap, isn't it, to go from?
It's a massive leap, and it's a process and a learning curve. And hopefully you learn all of those tools along the way before it's too late. The nature of the addict, of course, is that you push and you push and you do everything to extremes. I didn't just drink. I drank till I was homeless, and then kept going.
Yeah.
I mean, the irrationality of that is staring you in the face. The choice is no longer yours to make. Nobody would choose that as a lifestyle choice.
Yeah. Do you think it's, we sort of talk about the extreme behaviours of an addict. Do you think there's a moment where, when you get clean and sober, which you have been for, is it 10 years?
10 years.
That almost becomes, or it has to maybe become an extreme behaviour in itself for you to stay committed to that?
It becomes an addiction.
Right.
Okay. You have to address your recovery with the same level of obsession.
Right.
That took you into your addiction. Obsessions and addictions are very closely related. And it's how I can trace the roots of my addiction back to my obsessive behaviours as a small child, which seemed quite innocent and innocuous at the time. And they were. But what they pointed to was an inability to cope with the world, particularly while I struggled with social anxiety, I struggled in groups and teams, and struggled with other people. But that said, I was popular at school. I was well liked. I was reasonably intelligent, and I got my way through to the point where nothing flagged up.
Were you pretty good at masking things when you were young?
You're very good at masking. And I think if I'd let a psychologist into my head at 18, 19, he would probably come up with a few labels that may have allowed for a possible intervention at that point.
Right.
But as I say, that wasn't available in the 80s. There was a lot of stigma around mental health. It was basically, what makes you think you're so different? Just get on with it.
Yeah. Stop being a flake.
I accepted that and tried to get on with it, and failed. I mean, ultimately, as I say, it's a tale of recovery and redemption, and I came out of the other side. I pushed it right to limits, to the point of almost death. And for me, on my journey, and I can only speak for myself, that's the point I had to get to.
Yeah.
There was no chance of any meaningful recovery before I got to that stage where I was literally staring death in the face. It took that. But when it came like a light switch. And the strange thing was, it wasn't the thought that I was going to die that scared me. I was angry that I was going to die a victim of my own behaviours. Okay. I hadn't prepared for that. That caught me out of the blue, but I thought, this is the key. This is my route out. I've got to latch onto this. I didn't want to die a victim. So that was at the point where I resigned to either get clean or die trying.
That anger you referenced then, is this something I've heard quite a number of times, that actually it's a much more desperate state to be in to have apathy than it is to have anger, because anger is a forward moving.
It's proactive.
Yes, exactly. Proactive. Whereas apathy and resigning yourself to a life, of misery, or even, contemplating that your death is on its way, sort of thing.
At that point, that anger was all I had.
Danger zone.
Yeah, it is. So I was 48 years old at this point. Physically, I was shot. I had chronic pancreatitis, multiple stomach ulcers. My nerves were shot to pieces. So I was a shell of the person I could have been, should have been, and once was. You're carrying all the shame and the regret and the self-loathing. And on top of that, you can't quite see the route out. And this is where faith kicks in. And recovery for me was a spiritual journey. I think it has to be. Yeah. And I'm not religious at all. I never have been. But I've always felt a need.
Religion and faith are different things,
Yeah, I needed that connection, and in hindsight now, it's probably what I was searching for all along. A spiritual connection, which, in my naivety and the folly of youth, sort of pursued through drugs. So it was about finding that reconnection within myself, There's a Buddhist quote: all the answers you seek lie within yourself," which I fully believe.
Absolutely.
Rehab, for example, is something outside of yourself, can give you the tools and the teachings of other people, but ultimately the journey is yours. In order to come out of it complete, you have to answer to yourself, the inner God.
You can only do it for you ultimately, can't you?
You can only do it for you, and it means you have to be selfish. And that's okay. Anything toxic, anything that's going to cause you mental distress, really, you've got to steer clear of. There's all sorts of triggers. Carrying a £10 note in your pocket was a trigger. Not something that you would automatically think of, but at that point in my life, a £10 note in my pocket meant only one of two things. That was either a bag of gear or a few cans from the off license. Either way, it was a ticket to get off my head, and nothing more than that. Nothing else had any value.
It was essentially a prescription for self-medication.
Exactly. I like that. Yeah,
there you
go. So yeah, it was about baby steps and learning how to walk around with a tenner in your pocket and not feel the.
Wow, I never. That's incredible perspective.
Yeah.
Nance, I know you've got some really good questions for Sean, so I want to make sure that I don't overtake this. And also just the guys that are watching, if you've got questions, we'll do our absolute best to fit them in, and also give us your comments and thoughts as well as we go along. Nance, feel free to
it sort of links in, Sean, with what you were just saying about triggers. I was just wondering, like, not what triggers you, that's your personal thing, but how do you cope when you get triggered? What these days, how do you cope with that?
I think over a period of the last 10 years, really, I've slowly I've found a way of just living my daily life that works for me. So I do a job that I love. That's fundamental and paramount. I wouldn't be able to do a job that I didn't feel committed to. So I love my work, and that gives me a routine and a regime. On my bad days, the faith kicks in, and I have routines. I get up at a certain time. I'm never late for work. That's a big thing for me. I always stay till the end of the day. I try to be the best person I can be every day. I suppose in a way I've shrunk my life to a degree. Although my eyes have opened massively, my physical connection with the world I suppose I found that withdrawal that's always suited me, even as the little boy.
So maybe it's more simplification rather than.
It's a simplification, exactly that.
That sort of links in with what I was going to ask you secondly, Sean, which was, are there certain areas physically and geographically that you avoid in order to not be triggered, or in order to not mix or see people from that era of your life?
That's ongoing, and it's sort of become second nature now. Certainly in the early days, again, having that obsessive approach to my recovery, I was very on top of who I associated with. I stayed out in Normanton. Nadia will know, a local area which is notorious for that's where you used to go and score your drugs, basically. So stay away from certain people, certain situations, anything that is remotely toxic. I simplify it in my own head, and I tell others, the guys I work with, just walk in the light. We know where the light is, all of us. Stay out of the dark. That's over there. And as long as I stay in the light, my faith tells me I'll be okay. I'll be all right.
We have that inbuilt sat nav, don't we? We just sometimes like to.
The moral compass is there. It was just learning how to tap back into it again. I never lost my moral compass. My moral compass was inherently strong within me. I was brought up with strict values and a moral code. And the fact that all that went out of the window just compounded my frustration at being in my addiction. I knew I just wasn't the person that I was truly on the inside.
Sorry, press the wrong button.
Finding the best of yourself and working on that. There's positives within us all. And on that day I came out of hospital, a wreck of my former self. There was a glimmer of hope, and there was a dogged determination. and that's all I had. So I took that, and I just hoped that would be enough. But yeah, it was about putting one foot in front of the other, taking baby steps, keeping in the light. And for the first 4 years, certainly, of my recovery, I attacked it obsessively, and I had to get through it. And I'll show you this picture. It sort of changed a bit when this day came. You see that?
Wow. Let me just put you on like a spotlight so we can see.
What the spotlights on? Yeah.
Oh wow! Look at that.
This happened through work. And as I said, I'd worked very hard, and I'll tell you a bit more about my job in a while. But I had the opportunity to meet Prince William. Never been a massive royalist, but it wasn't lost on me the fact that he was royalty. I was the cook at the homeless centre at the time, so I was cooking for royalty. And at his request, I had a private audience with him. Something similar to what we're doing here. He wanted to know basically my story and how I'd sort of come out to the other side. And it was at that point when I went home in that day, I thought I've sort of come full circle now. I've got royal patronage. I'm cooking for royalty. I've got a private audience with the future king. I thought I've arrived. I've arrived somewhere. I wasn't quite sure where.
Bless you.
What it allowed me to do was, it wasn't until that point that I allowed myself to be just Sean, as opposed to Sean the addict or Sean the recovering addict. It was 4 years in before I could accept that now I was Sean. I'd arrived somewhere. I wasn't quite sure where, but I'd arrived somewhere that allowed me to not take my foot off the gas, but just be a little bit kinder to myself. I can take a little bit off. I don't have to be so hard on myself.
Present in your own life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then shortly after that, we had a new boss at work, and he saw the benefits of my experience and wanted me to become a sport worker, which was always my sort of goal in the back of my mind. Wasn't quite sure how I was going to get there. I was too busy slaving over a hot stove feeding the homeless. But he basically laid a deal on the table, and he said, if you get your level 3 health and social care, I'll make you a sport worker.
Wow.
And at that point, I didn't even have my level 2. And he wanted me to be proactive in getting this to happen. So I went away, sourced it myself, got my level 2. A year later, went on, did my level 3, and true to his word, he made me a sport worker.
Fantastic.
Which is what I do to this day. So for the last few years, sort of had my dream job really. And it allows me to bring to the table the benefit of the life I've lived. It sort of gives some validity almost to the life I've lived.
Wonderful comment here from Avril. So much admiration for your hard journey we can all find ourselves. Sometimes it just takes longer than others.
Thank you, Avril. It's a very good point. It's not a race at all, and you can't hold yourself to anybody else's standards. I was 48 when I came out of the other side. Good 20 years into serious drug addiction and alcoholism, and the roots of it went back way before that. So most of my adult life, but it's not a race, and it's certainly never too late. I took it to the wire.
11th hour stuff. It
was definitely, but it can be done. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to do.
I've got a question around sort of, it struck me from the first time we spoke, and certainly very much reinforced today with this conversation, that you seem to me to have a very high level of self-awareness, whether that's something you've developed over time or you've always had, I don't know. And I wonder what's your perspective on what part having high emotional intelligence or self-awareness in general plays in the ability to recover from very severe addiction.
I think it's an uncomfortable truth that it takes a certain degree of emotional intelligence, and without sounding arrogant, it does require that. To answer your point, I have always had an innate sense of self-awareness.
Right. It certainly appears that way. Yeah.
It stood me well
Yeah.
when it came to my recovery years later. But yeah, that's always been there. Yeah, and as I say, it's a spiritual journey. It's a journey to the inside. It's a journey within, and you need to be honest with yourself to have that self-awareness in order to do that successfully. Yeah, I consider that to be one of my major tools. And I think I need to make the point that I nearly didn't make it, even after the recovery. I tried to do it on my own, and I didn't feel I needed residential rehab. And the way I explain that is, by the time I sort of needed rehab, that was the point at which I realised I didn't need it.
Right.
You know what I mean? I got to the point where rehab would have been the conventional option. You're that bad, you need to go to rehab. When that light switch flicked in intensive care, and I got rushed in with a burst stomach ulcer, the point at which I nearly died again. That's the point at which I didn't need rehab. The switch had flicked.
Yeah. Because to make any significant change, we have to have made that decision ourselves, don't we?
Yeah.
I think for something like that, maybe the only thing that can really make that happen is that decision, and therefore the rehab process in itself maybe facilitates what comes after easier.
If you're in the right place,
not the thing that cures you. And
no, absolutely not. And I think it's a problem with the service I work in, unfortunately, that we send far too many people to rehab who go there expecting a cure. And there is no cure.
No.
I'm still an addict. I'm an addict every day I wake up. In terms of how that manifests, I have to be mindful of my inherent addictive behaviours, my obsessions. I'm prone to overanalyzation of things that I don't need to think so much about, to the point where it causes me anxiety. But I'm aware of this now, and I know how to work with it. I know how to manage those feelings. Mainly because I'm clear-headed, and my thought process are not being clouded anymore by drink and drugs. And I'm not even going to say the temptations are there anymore 10 years on, but I still have to be careful. It would be arrogant of me to say that I'm cured, recovered. I think as an addict, you never are. And I know that it could only be some traumatic lifestyle events that could tip the balance emotionally, and then I'm in danger again. So I don't take my eye off the ball. Especially with alcohol. Heroin you can sort of distance yourself from because it's certain scene. It exists in certain places that you have to physically go to, so you can avoid that.
Yeah.
Alcohol, of course, it's all around us.
Everywhere.
You can't avoid that. The only way to deal with that.
It's so easy to, be, even if if you've got someone in your life who is sober, or going through that process, or recovering and so on, it's so easy to accidentally say, "Oh, do you want a drink?" or "Should we go out for a drink?" Or
it just rolls off the tongue with people.
Yeah, of course it does, because it's so socially acceptable. It's really weird little. It's actually so insidious in terms of how it pervades our society.
Yeah, it is. But I'm
There's
fine
almost certain situations where we're encouraged to drink, isn't there?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And there's a hell of a lot of pressure if you decide not to. I was talking to a friend last week about this, who has avoided drinking for a long time and has actually decided, for various reasons, that she's going to break her period of sobriety. Not the same situation as you're in, Sean, but actually what she's realised is that it makes life, it's actually almost become her sobriety has become a monster in itself in her particular circumstances, which is too complicated for me to explain, and it's not my place to do so, obviously, publicly. But there have been certain social pressures and social situations that have made her choices harder for her than is healthy for her, which
Yeah.
is a real weird,
Mm,
complex situation.
It's why you need supportive people in your life.
Totally, yeah.
My social circle is, I don't purposely restrict it. I've always had a small social circle. I've always had a few select friends. They're usually the weirdos that nobody else gets on with. They were always the ones that I was drawn to.
Thanks, Sean. What does that say
Yes,
about me?
Nadia. Nothing much has changed in that regard. I can count my friends on one hand. Yeah, I still I struggle with certain people. Struggle with most people, if I'm honest. But that's fine. I've got no issue with that. I get on with everybody, and more importantly, I can move through society perfectly functioning as I should be. I pay my
Are
bills.
you naturally quite introverted anyway,
I'm
Sean?
I'm naturally introverted. Yeah, I always have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm asked about how we could try and spot the addicts of the future, in a playground screen, trying to pick out show me the 7-year-old kid and I'll show you the man sort of thing.
Yeah.
How do we spot the potential addicts and the
Well, it's
temptation?
funny actually, because I was going to ask you, what do we need to do as a society to, to be better at this?
Yeah. Very difficult. I mean, no point talking about education. I was educated to the max at school. Most of my generation even were. We had the films and the talks, and heroin was the dirty word. It quite rightly should be. I know exactly what I was getting myself into. Well, I thought I did. But no, all those educational films at school didn't stop me wanting to try it.
Yeah.
I mean, on top of everything else, I was curious.
Yeah, it almost makes it desirable, doesn't it, when you're told?
Yeah, I was fascinated by the inner workings of the mind and what it was capable of doing and how to unlock its secrets, and drugs are.
I mean, I remember the Grange Hill campaign of
just say no.
All that exactly, and for someone like me, I was like, oh, that's really scary. I'm going to run away. But I know for a lot of my peers, it was, oh, okay, this is exciting. What do I need to say no to?
Yeah, there's definitely elements of that. None of the reasons taken in isolation would have been enough to lead me down the road that I took. But yeah, perfect storm of all of them combined. I was the kid at school in the playground with this snorkel Parker, keeping himself away from the other kids, trying to withdraw from the world.
Right.
Heroin is the ultimate withdrawal. The patterns were there at 5 years old.
Right.
So in terms of how you spot the addict of the future, very, very difficult. Even if I look at my peer group when I was in my addiction, I stood apart from them in so many ways.
Right.
I wasn't naturally criminally minded, and of course you have to commit crime to feed your addiction. That was anathema to me. So I found myself mixing in circles that I hadn't particularly grown up in as a schoolboy in my teenage years. I'd walked quite a conventional, almost middle class path up until the point where the wheels fell off my wagon. So I didn't even fit into the heroin scene particularly. That said, heroin takes all comers. It doesn't discriminate.
Yeah. I've got a question here, Sean, for you. I guess it's, we're obviously focusing a lot on your experience and, that kind of first-hand, almost eye of the storm thing. But I wonder what advice, from your perspective, what advice would you give to people who are living with or close to people who are right in the middle of that addiction and, that kind of really self-destructive, then, they're not being themselves, they're bringing out all this behavior that is not the best version of them. What would you, can you even give advice on that?
There's, again, we're back to uncomfortable truths again. And it's such an illogical process. The outsider trying to deal with the addict throws logicality as the fix.
Yeah.
You know, if I offer you a car, if you stop taking heroin for 6 months, I'll buy you a car, something along those lines. Logicality would say, yeah, why not? I'll do anything to get that car. But the addict said, I don't give a shit about the car. The car's not going to help me when I'm rattling tomorrow morning.
That's right.
So there's no value in that to the addict. In fact, there's very little that's of value to the addict. It's one of the attractions of being an addict. You've only got one thing that you worry about.
So there's no gain or loss other than the gain or loss of the substance or substances that you're self-medicating with that is going to actually propel you out of that comes from an external source.
Okay, yeah, I think we're back to Jumanji. You've got to see the game through. One piece of advice I give people flippantly is, if you don't want to go to London, don't get on the train. Once you're on it, you can't get off.
Yeah, I don't want to go to London. I had to go last week, unfortunately.
I
did get on the train, though. My own fault.
There's uncomfortable truths. There's little that you can do, but that doesn't mean to say there's nothing you can do.
Right. Okay.
Knowing that there was nothing my family could do for me, I took myself away from my family, and I didn't see any of them for 13 years.
Wow.
They are private detectives out looking for me, and they still couldn't find me. I was living with the travellers at the time, the Irish travellers. So I wasn't claiming benefits. I was on the road, town to town. They didn't know if I was alive or dead. So at that point, there was nothing that they could do, and I took myself away because I knew there was nothing that they could do. All I was doing was bringing trouble to the door. So I distanced myself from my own family. But because of the value system that I had growing up, when I was ready to come out the other side at 48 years old and I reconnected with my family, all of those values, they became important. They what brought me home ultimately.
Right.
And as I suspected, there was no recrimination. They were just glad to have me back.
So you hear, don't you, stories of people who have had to essentially give up hand their family over to police for, if they
you
really
can't allow yourself to become an enabler. So many friends become enablers.
And I suppose it's like, what's the point at which you stop having open arms to so hard.
It's so hard as a parent, particularly because all of your natural maternal paternal instincts are to protect, pick them up, dust them down, cuddle them.
This enabling thing, I think, is really key. It's probably our nature, isn't it, to keep giving people a roof over their head and feeding them and saying, I'm there for you, and why don't you do this? And
there is a time and a place for that, but it has to come with boundaries and restrictions if necessary. But if you open your purse to an addict, the addict will keep coming back until the purse is empty. It doesn't matter if it's your mum or your dad.
And then they'll move on to reality. We've got a question from somebody. I'm not sure who it is. Tell us, Facebook user. Do you think there's an addictive personality type, or are we all potentially addict? Struggling with that word today for some reason. And it's a natural human coping strategy. Just that different people are drawn to different things, e.g. relationships, sports, sex, etc., turning a negative addiction into a more positive one, e.g. smoking into vaping, that's meant to say, seems to only work to a point. Great question.
Very good question. I think I'm not sure if I take alcoholism to be a disease, as is sometimes touted, but what it certainly does do, it mimics a disease. It progresses over time in the way that a disease manifests within the body, gets worse and worse. So alcoholism, as an example, progresses as if it were a disease. However, I think it's more to do with
it's Kay that said that.
it's an inherent. Hello, Kay. I think it's a predisposition. I certainly think I have a predisposition to addiction, and as I've already pointed out, that the instance of the snorkel parker in the playgrounds, I can see a direct link. I can remember my feelings at the time, and I can equate them to feelings that I had at the height of my addiction. The desire to withdraw, shut the world out. So yes, as much as it can be genetically inherent within you. Going back to the perfect storm analogy, I think it takes other factors to come to play. Right. Before the addictive gene can dictate certain behaviours, and those certain behaviours can lead you down certain paths. And as I say, a culmination of those paths in the wrong direction, before you know it, you're in trouble. And because it's a culmination of different paths, it makes it very hard to, where do you start to deal with that?
Yeah, there's no specific route map or
for all intents and purposes. At 18 years old, I was doing fine. I was had a good upbringing, loving parents, had a decent job. Everything was going well. Nobody looking on could have said, this guy in 5 years' time is going to be in a mess. I couldn't see it myself. So yeah, uncomfortable truth again, I'm afraid, very, very hard.
Yeah, and I suppose, it would be tempting to fall into the misconception that this happens to people who are, in a certain kind of socio-economic background or circumstances, and that are on the fringe of society and all of that kind of stuff. But life is such now, particularly, that there's so much pressure and so much anxiety and so much expectation. You mentioned much earlier, this idea of shame and regret, and I think that is systemic. It's in the DNA of our society that we feel shame for so many things. Yeah.
I think the pressures that could lead people down that path, they're ever more apparent these days. It's I think as a society it's very different, because there seems to be so much wrong. It doesn't matter where you look, healthcare, hospitals, whatever direction you look in, it really is broken, and a broken society can only lead to broken people.
Do you think that's what it is then, Sean? Do you think it's a societal problem, or do you think it's more of a personal problem?
I think as a society we've largely lost the ability to take responsibility and account for our own actions. And on an individual level, it's the first stage to recovery, owning what you are, accepting what you are. And all I see around me in the world at large is bubbles and illusions. There's very little reality going on. No one's having serious conversations here. Everybody's ticking boxes and shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. Nothing's actually.
I mean, that's so poetic
at grassroots level. The problem is fundamental grassroots issues. So I mean, for myself in my work, I just sort of take solace in the fact we do what we can do. And ultimately, whatever you think of the rights and wrongs of addiction, homelessness, we have a moral obligation to pick people up when they're down. To recognise that these people are victims of a society that we've all created. And the benefits of some of us fall through the cracks and get missed.
There's a lot of emphasis on dealing with the outputs, the outcomes of what happens, as opposed to ploughing energy into fixing the root causes.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I come across in my work every day, and it's a part of the work. I don't like. I spend far too much time ticking boxes, and I do my work to fundamentally help people who need help. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely.
We do what we can do.
Have you got any more questions up your sleeve, Nats?
I I was just going to say, what do you find most uplifting in your life now to take you away from addiction, and where does the hope lie in its manifestation today?
Nice.
There's so many things, Nad. I mean, number one, I suppose I've got to be selfish and say I'm thankful I've got my life.
Yeah.
Everything else stems from that. As I said, there's no doubt I wouldn't be here if I hadn't made the choice I made 10 years ago. So that's the first one. And after that, it's family. I've got my family back.
Amazing. And you said,
You're right, darling.
oh, bless you.
You're right.
Yeah.
You are a massive inspiration, you know, Sean. I'm absolutely sure that the people that are watching this and are going to see this in the future, and
Yeah,
you know, it's going to have a huge impact on people.
Definitely.
I was going to. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think if there's any sort of message to send out to people, it's don't give up. It's never too late.
Yeah.
You know, you can take it right to the edge, and you can pull it back. It's doable. It's possible.
Yeah.
And I'm proof of that. People just take that away. I've done
you said when we first spoke about doing this that you realised you'd been wasting your talents for 30 years.
Yeah.
And I suppose I'm intrigued about some of those talents that you feel, you know, you've maybe not only the ones that you hadn't used while you could have been all that time, but maybe things that you've also discovered about yourself since that you didn't know you were, you know, were in your strengths kit.
Yeah, I think the things that I bring to the table now in my work, for example, empathy, compassion, understanding, they're things that I've always had within me. They're innate within me. What I didn't have was the ability to use them in any functional capacity. I was too messed up myself to be able to tap into those talents for them to be a benefit to other people. So that's a revelation that's come sort of this time round. So my approach to my work as well as my daily life, I embrace those, and I do consider them talent, soft skills, if you like. And then in terms of other talents, I've got my guitars, as you see.
Yeah.
There's a little tale to tell there that it was another one of the wheels that fell off my wagon was the loss of my ability to play the guitar. And that came about a few years into my addiction. So early stages of heroin use, really. I hadn't totally consumed me at this point. I ended up in a situation as a result of my own bad choices, and ended up being attacked with a machete, which nearly cut my hand off. It cut all through my tendons and the artery. So I nearly bled to death on the way to hospital initially. That was the first time I died. I nearly died.
Wow.
So yeah, 7 hours in 30, they patched me back up. What that left me with was a hand that doesn't work particularly well. Restricted mobility, I've got no feeling in this hand. But it works, you know, everybody, it does work. It meant I couldn't play the guitar. And Nadia knows me from these days. The guitar was a big part of my life. I played every day. I played in bands. I played in front of other people, in front of audiences. It was part of my identity almost. I know I shouldn't allow that, but it was nonetheless. It was part of my identity. It was part of who I was.
I resonate with that.
And in the early days of my drug taking, if you could see the drug taking as the negative side of the balance, the guitar playing and the artistic side was on the other, almost balancing it out. I thought, whatever happens in the rest of my life, I'm a guitar player and I'm good, so I can entertain people, I can entertain myself. And in an instant, that was taken away. So
it's big.
Devastating in itself. And there was the post-traumatic stress fallout from being attacked with a machete. It was aiming for my head at the time, so, you know, in hindsight, lucky again, put my hand in the...
It's giving me goosebumps.
But yeah, you know, the classic recurring nightmares, just my own anger issues coming to the fore. It's my left hand as well, which is my dominant hand. And I don't know how much you believe in the theory, but I was having to use the opposite side of my brain all of a sudden. My left hand was out of action, so I became right-handed overnight.
Wow.
And that certainly caused personality change.
Okay.
Using the opposite side of my brain. Left-handed, using creative, artistic sides. And all of a sudden that wasn't being used, and I was using anyway.
That's fascinating. We
So
could do
all
a
of this
thing on that.
All of this addiction, I almost said, what's the point? I might as well I dealt with the post-traumatic stuff by increasing my drug and alcohol use. Yeah, it's just another little cog in the journey, really, that took me on that path. There are very few points along the. I mean, if you look at it over a 30-year time span, very few points at which any successful intervention could have been made. It was all down to me, and I was incapable for most of that time of doing anything about my situation. But from an external point of view, there's very little. I mean, I went to jail. I just came out of jail angry, and I had my travel discharge money, and I didn't even go straight home. I got the train straight to my dealer.
Right.
So jail didn't serve its purpose in that sense.
Rarely does it?
It really does. So yeah, just to conclude the guitar tale, I didn't play for 10 years. I didn't play a note. I thought I'd never play again. Finally came in off the streets after several years on and off being homeless. Got a room in a homeless hostel. And one of the support workers there knew from a mutual friend that I used to play the guitar, and encouraged me to try and start playing again. And he even gave me a guitar. It's the one in the middle that I still have to this day. And he said, "It's your guitar, just go away and practice." So I found a way around not being able to play conventionally. I tuned my guitar differently. And I worked. And although I had the frustration of not being able to play as well as I used to play, I can still make music, still playing, entertaining myself.
You built your own rules of guitar playing, you see. We're all down for that here.
Yeah. Yeah, I almost feel guilty to say I even got that back. I got my health back, sort of. I've got a few war wounds.
Why feel guilty though?
Well, that's why I say it almost flippantly. It was certainly a feeling in the early days of my recovery that you don't deserve this. And like I said before, it was the first 4 years where I had to learn how to like myself again.
That must be.
For those 4 years, I was on the back foot with everything. I didn't expect anyone to trust me or understand me. All I knew was if I worked really hard and carried on, I was voluntary working at this point. Which eventually led to my job.
This very much links into something I was thinking about, and Navral's also highlighted to a certain degree, that that you talk about the guilt that you felt, that you kind of made it out of that darkness with so much to be thankful for. And I just wonder how, especially with your faith, how much you reflect on the ripple effect you now must have, the most of which you must never see, because you've been through all of that stuff and are now able to gift people with so much as a result of that.
I have to remind myself, I think I probably alluded to it when I spoke to you before, Emma, some of the elements of my story, and I've not gone into great detail about some things. It's enough to say that it was a really dark place that I found myself in. Sorry, I've lost my train.
That's all right. We were talking about that ripple effect that comes with, you've been through all of this stuff, and the other side, and maybe there's essentially purpose to that.
I often take quite a casual approach to the life I've lived, because it was my day-to-day life, and I just got on with it. And it's only when you stand on the other side and reflect back, even I can see how sort of bad it seems, really, looking on. On paper, my life's pretty good. Was pretty bad.
Yeah.
Just the usual stuff, just consumed by the drugs, jail, losing your family, not being there for my daughter growing up. So many negatives. But ultimately, I don't have time for regrets, and that's not to say I wouldn't do things differently. I do most of it differently.
But regret is actually
But there's
not
no
massively
regret.
helpful to anyone, is it? Unless you do something with it.
Yeah, I always knew that there could be validity to my journey, but only if I came out the other side of it.
Yeah.
And up until those last days, at 48 years old, I was in that state of denial where I thought, I'm going to come out of this the other side at some point. I don't know what I was thinking, because death was rapidly coming at me down the tunnel.
Right. Do you think that was some sort of, that was like a, almost naivety or denial? Do you think it was like an inner knowing that somehow you were going to find your way through this?
It's what I wanted, and it's why I was so angry with myself when they also burst, and I was staring death in the face, and I thought, I'm too late. When I was angry, with myself.
Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, obviously now I've come full circle, and the life that I lived for all those years does have its validity. I've wronged many of the, I've righted many of the wrongs. I've corrected the mistakes as best I can. And I'm aware that I've got a story to tell and experience to offer to other people. So that's why I do the work that I do. And yeah, it almost doesn't validate. It almost validates that my whole journey, really.
Yeah, and it gives it meaning and purpose, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, and that's
beyond
absolutely
just
vital.
you. And we don't know how many people are going to watch this, for example, in the space of however many months or years. And the work that you do now, and not only are you impacting the people that you have contact with day to day, but that ripples out massively, doesn't it? And
yeah, but I believe in
part of faith,
the ripple
isn't
effect.
it?
Absolutely, I think.
Yeah, that for me, that is part of faith, that you just, if you can be the best version of yourself with whatever resources you've got at the time, even if you're having a terrible day, and sometimes the best version of yourself is not as good as other days, but part of that faith is about knowing that even if you never see the effects, that if you do things to the best of your ability, it will have an effect.
Absolutely. I'm a big believer in that, and again, part of the reason I do what I do now is because I'm aware of the ripple effects of my former existence, if you like. I thought what I was doing in isolation. It's nobody else's business. I'm just messing up my own body and my own mind, nothing to do with you. And I carried that for quite a while. But obviously, when you have the honest conversation, you realise that what you're doing in isolation is having massive effects, first and foremost on family and friends, but the ripples go much further than that.
Do you know, there's a beautiful and tragic irony about that addiction becomes one of the most selfish, behaviors, I guess, in itself, but that actually, in order to get out of that, you have to be deeply selfish. Isn't that?
At no stage when you're discussing addiction, there's logicality come into it. It's a logical process, or logical situations, and you get out of it through illogical means. It is bizarre, and it's why it's so hard to fathom. That process is ongoing. I mean, part of this talk with you guys is about how I still manage my emotions and my feelings to this day. And 10 years clean and sober, it's not a daily battle, but it's a daily issue. It's something I have to pay homage to. Because of that ripple effect. I wake up each day being the best person, trying to be the best person I can be. And I still go to bed every night with a smile on my face. I've not forgotten what it's like to sleep on the streets and finding your clothes in hedgerows and eating out of skips and all of the dark things. It's important not to forget.
Yeah, really. Yeah, very much so.
Sharing my story to young people. I've not really. I've done bits and bobs over the years, mainly through the work that I do. I work for a charity, basically. We're a homeless charity, so every now and again they wheel me out with my little story to local radio or a couple of bits of TV stuff, a couple of group chats to various businesses throughout the city that support us as a charity. But young people, not specifically. The centre where I work, we're predominantly adults 18 and over, so I don't have a great deal of input with young people. But yeah, I think
when you were at school or in your teens, do you think if somebody like you had come in and told your story, do you think that would have made any difference to you?
Probably wouldn't have stopped me going down the path I did, but it would have given me hope that there was some redemption on the other side of it.
Right.
That makes sense.
I totally agree with that, Avril.
Nothing was going to stop me. I chose my path from a young age really.
Right.
A bit like the Jumanji thing, I was just going to keep rolling those dice till I got to the end of the game.
Yeah. That is an incredibly powerful analogy, actually. That sort of, if you're going into another round, you ain't getting out of it until it's done with you.
Yeah. I mean, that's the nature of addiction, and don't underestimate its allure and its power. And yeah, everybody has their drug of choice. Mine was alcohol and heroin, both ultimate deceivers and manipulators. Doesn't matter how intelligent, how on your game you think you are, they will take you down.
Yeah.
Well,
spit you out the other side.
This, Sean, has been, as Avril says, mesmerising, fascinating, incredibly inspiring, and
very moving,
so candid, very moving, absolutely. And just so honoured to have you step into our space and be so vulnerable and so positive as well. It's
a colleague of mine referred to me as the most optimistic cynic that she'd ever met.
I love that.
I could totally relate to that.
You, Sean,
I'm an optimist by nature. I'm very smiley and upbeat and positive, but life has taught me to be cynical also.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I've got the inherent optimism, so I function quite well on that one. But I do find myself sitting on the fence between optimism and cynicism.
You know what? We love sitting on the fence in Rebels. That is part of our ethos, actually.
Yeah.
From that place, you can see so much.
I think that's the point of it. Yeah, you can see all around you.
Yeah, of course you can. You've got a 360. Yeah. Sean, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, guys. An absolute pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you for tag teaming with me, Nad. It's been a
it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Nad. We'll talk soon.
And let's round it up there, guys. If you're watching in the future, please come and comment on the YouTube channel or whatever platform you're watching this on. And I'm sure if you've got questions and you've kind of missed us live, that Sean would be happy to answer them. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you, Emma. Thanks, Nadia.
Let's give her a
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.